Good evening, everyone. My name is Greg Gorga, Executive Director of your Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. I want to wish you all a happy St. Patrick's Day. Got my green Maritime Museum hat on for this. You are going to enjoy tonight The Ships That Built the West, the Scandinavian Navy, Wapama, and Verdulin by Olaf Engvig. So thank you for being here this evening. I want to especially thank our sponsor of our lecture series, Marie Morris Rowe. I know you're out there, Marie. We'll hopefully see you here next month, and wishing you a speedy recovery. And I want to let you know that this is being recorded. It will be up on our website. It usually takes us about 1 or 2 weeks to do that, but we thank our friends at TV Santa Barbara for doing that. A little information about the museum, what's going on here before we get Olaf up here. I want to thank all of our Santa Barbara Maritime Museum members and Navigator Circle members who joined me for an amazing 3-day trip down to San Ignacio Lagoon in late February, where we interacted with the gray whales, the mothers and pups that they are nursing down there. We hope to do that trip again next year. So really fun trip for about 25 of our members down to San Ignacio Lagoon. And then on April 13th, we are having the largest exhibits openings we've ever had here at the Maritime Museum, probably since we opened our doors in July of 2000. We are opening, I've lost count at this point, to be honest, friends, about 5 different exhibits. We have a permanent exhibit called Whales Are Superheroes. That's part of an environmental alliance of museums, 15 of them through the county. And ours, Whales Are Superheroes, talks about how whales help fight climate change by absorbing CO2. We have 2 artists, John Barron and Kelly Klaus, who did artwork. We have kids art that we did in the classroom with the kids, talked to them about whales, and then they made their own art, and that's going to be up on the wall as one of our art displays. And then we did a general call for art for kindergartners through 6th grade, and we received over 500 pieces of art, and we are taking components of that and making an interactive 3D experience in our Munger Theater. All that will open on April 14th. The experience is 1 month. The other exhibits are about 3 months, and then the permanent Whales Are Superheroes will be up for years and years to come. But we are opening that on Wednesday, April 13th. If you're a member of our Navigator Circle, or if you're a member of our Flagship Society, have us in your planned giving. That reception starts at 4:30, and then our general members are invited at 5:30 to 7 on April 13th. So hope to see you all here. And kind of in conjunction with that, our April lecture is going to be Santa Barbara Channel's Whales and Their Climate Connection by our good friend Holly Loheisen. I know some of you have seen her speak. She does help us out with all of our education programs, and it's always a pleasure to have Holly here doing a lecture. We have a new members reception on May 5th, first one we've done since COVID, so if you're a new member in the last few years, you'll be invited to a nice little reception there. We go back to our curated cocktail parties for our Navigator Circle members, our Flagship Society members, and general membership on May 12th. It's going to be once a month, the second Thursday of each month. And then in May, on the 19th, we have Dearest Minnie, A Soldier's Story by Leslie Compton, is our May lecture. I want to remind you, if you're not following us on Instagram or Facebook, you can do that real easy at the bottom of our webpage, on the homepage, SBMM. And if you can also sign up for our weekly updates and our monthly currents newsletter on the homepage. I want to thank all of you who are members of the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. Your support makes our work possible, and I especially want to thank our Navigator Circle members and our Flagship Society members. So tonight, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Olaf Engvig. Olaf holds a graduate degree in maritime history from the University of Oslo as an expert on Scandinavian ships and their building materials. In addition, he has a CMAS First Class Scuba Diving Certificate and a Master's Mariner's License. Born in Riga, Norway, he now resides in Southern California with his family. He was named Scandinavian American of the Year in 2015 and is the recipient of 2 Norwegian Royal Medals for his work with preserving maritime heritage. He also is internationally known for his work saving and restoring historic vessels. Mr. Engvig's book, The Ships That Built the West, the Scandinavian Navy, Wapama, and Verdulin, shares the maritime stories of the Scandinavian captains, seamen, and ships that helped to build the West Coast, such as the schooner Wapama, once the main vessel on display at the San Francisco Maritime Museum. The book also highlights NVIG's 36-year restoration, completed in 2015, of the Verdulin, a Norwegian hybrid ship with a sail and a small steam engine, now the sole survivor, representing 300-plus Scandinavian lumber carriers. The book is the recipient of the Carl Cordum Maritime History Award. Mr. Envig is also the author of Legends in Sail, and both books are available here at your Santa Barbara Maritime Museum store. Also, I want to invite all of you down here this Saturday from 11 to 3, and Olaf will be selling his book at a discount, mind you, and will be willing to autograph his books for you. So that is this Saturday from 11 to 3. Please join me in welcoming Olaf Envig.
Thank you, Greg. Welcome to all of you. I'm going to give you a little history of a history that's not very well known so far, and that is how they built the West. That the cities, especially San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego, and the rest of the coast, and even the inland. And it couldn't be done without a heck of a lot of lumber. So in 1885, San Francisco came up with a new type of ship to carry the lumber down the coast. Before that, they used two-mast sailing vessels, which eventually became far too small, so they decided to take a barge, put the sailing ship in the bow, and a small engine and a steam ship in the back of the barge, and then you have the lumber schooner or the hybrid ship, or whatever you call it. And they did those ships from 1885 on. They did build the West, and a lot of them were built, all of them actually were built of wood, and they hauled all the lumber down the coast. And the first picture is here. This is a small early lumber schooner, same as the one you saw in the first picture. That's taking aboard lumber at Mendocino from loading on high wire. And you can see they're shipping the lumber aboard to high wire, because up the coast from San Francisco going north, it was a lot of wood and a lot of trees that could be harvested. And they had sawmills and everything, but they had no way of getting it out to the ships, because the ship had to be moved out behind or between the rocks on a very open Pacific coast. And it was only captains from Scandinavia that dared to take a ship in between rocks. They were used to it from back home, so they said, no sweat, we'll do that, no problem. So those were the captains, and they were 85% of all the names of all the captains of steam schooners were Scandinavian names. And the same with the sailors. They came from windjammers. They were tired of sailing around the Horn, and they finally decided to jump ship in San Francisco and join the Scandinavian Navy, as it finally was called. The Scandinavian Navy was the name that stuck with this fleet of lumber carriers, and it also have a lot of other strange names or nicknames, like Burrows of the High Seas and Finnish man of war and all that, but Scandinavian Navy was the exact right name because it was a Scandinavian Navy, all lumber carriers. And here is a clue for you. Of course, everyone knows that people from Northern Europe, they developed the prairie. And among them, of course, many Scandinavians, also Norwegians, as this letter shows you. And people on the prairie, they came in families, you know, mother and father, some kids maybe, or others. And in the long winter, where it was very little to do on the farm, the women would sit down and write sorrowful letters back to the people they left. They knew that they would never see them again, their sister and father and mother and all this. So, and they saved all these letters. So over in Norway, at this particular museum in a place called Verdalen, the place name is Verdalen, they've saved about 4,000 of these letters. And if you look closely, you can see, you know, it says South Dakota or North Dakota, Minnesota. And those were farmers. Apart from farmers, it was one other group that came by the numbers. And I'll ask you, who were those people? They were the sailors. And the sailors was usually young men, and they manned the ships. And they came by the thousands. America needed a heck of a lot of sailors for their local transport and for foreign trade. And in those days, about 150 years ago, Norway had the largest sailing fleet of merchant ship that traded around the world. So a lot of Norwegians became sailors. But nothing is made about this. This is a history today completely forgotten. While the people that went to the prairie, they not only did the wives write letters home, but many authors, they made fictional novels and they made non-fiction novels about the immigrants, the giants in the earth. The Moberg is very famous because it was later filmed and made into a stage play and called The Immigrants with Mark von Sydow and Liv Ullmann. And those were all farmers. And if you talk about the farmers from Scandinavia compared to farmers from Ireland, England, the Netherlands, Germany, France, etc., you know, they were a fairly small group, but they did leave a lot of history, as you can see here, in books, both in English and in Norwegian. Not so with the other group I mentioned, sailors. I am proud to say that this is probably the first real conclusive book about the Norwegian in particular, but the Scandinavians that actually built the West Coast. And apart from that, I should also add that a heck of a lot of sailors and captains, officers from Norway sailed on the other coast in other type of vessel, steam tankers and everything, you name it. Because the Americans, they knew that the best sailors in the world, they came out of Scandinavia. So that's why it was easy for a Scandinavian to get a job as a sailor, a crew member, or a captain in an American ship. And this book tells a story about the Scandinavian Navy, and it also tells the story about the two ships that was left as museum ship to to represent the Scandinavians and the lumber trade, the ship that built the West. I'll also lecture a little about them later, but let's start with the Scandinavian Navy. As already mentioned, you know, in the first years after 1885, when the first steam schooner steamed out of San Francisco, going north to take on lumber, here is a typical ship of that era, 1890, 1900, 1905, that would load a lot of lumber first in the hull, then sealed off that, and then carry on loading lumber till the main deck was awash. And you can see here is a lumber ship getting on the last piece of lumbers and sort of ready to cast loose and go down to San Francisco with its cargo. You can see it's moored out in the sea, and all the wiring you see shows that they are sending the lumber aboard by high wire. Here's another one, same situation, same type, similar ship with the rig and sail forward. You can see a little of the sail on the foremast and the steam engine in the back. And you can see it has a lot of deck cargo all the way back and forward after the hull and the hatch is loaded. And this is a very special picture because you can see the ship has raised steam. That means it's ready to go to San Francisco. And the last piece of lumber is coming on board. That's a huge, big 8x8 or 10x10 or something like that. And it's a guy standing there holding his hands, you know, to the trolley that ships the lumber aboard. And I bet you that's the captain coming. He's been ashore and signed off all the papers and all this, you know. And when he gets on board now, they'll cast loose and go down south to pick up, to unload the lumber. So to start everything, you know, they have to start in the forest. And in Europe, and of course these immigrants that worked the forest, they came out of Europe. And you probably know that the best lumber in Europe are in Northern Europe. Norway, Sweden, Finland, and even Russia and Siberia has wonderful lumber. While further south, you know, it's different type of lumber. So, and people coming out west, they found, you know, it's the same type of lumber that we have back home, but it's much, much larger, you know. These trees are enormous. A Norwegian spruce, or a Christmas tree, as it sometimes is called, it can grow to about 100 feet. Those trees, the redwood, especially the coastal redwood, grows to be 300 feet. So it's quite a difference. And here's two guys. They made an undercut. That means the tree is going to fall towards the picture. And they started sawing on the other side, and you can even see the inspector standing behind and looking at those two guys. And in the old days, when this work was done by hand, you know, they needed a better part of a day to get one of these huge big, I think this is a Douglas fir, but I'm not sure. Could be a redwood, but it doesn't look like it. To get it down, you know, it was quite a job. Today, with a chainsaw, you know, you can do it in an hour. And here is a coastal redwood, one of the big ones. and it's up in Oregon. And I myself has been driving through. It's a tree drive-through. You can see the car on the other side of the tree. And me and my wife and kids, we have actually taken our car through that tree. So, and that was popular in the old days. They used to make a tree hollow, and you could drive through it instead of making the road go around it. And of course, the first time they started with rails, you know, to get the lumber or the logs out of the forest down to the sawmill, they used not horses, but they used oxen. It's pictures that you can see 12 oxen hauling, just like the locomotive here is doing. So that's an iron ox actually, or an iron horse, if you will, that are hauling the logs out of the forest and down to the sawmill. And this is a very boasting picture. It is 25 merchant marine captains. They're all captains and all have their own ship. And they are actually from tall ships. That is the 3-mast bark or 4-mast bark or full rig ships or whatever. And this picture had all the names. It's taken in San Francisco in 1909, and all the names are Norwegian. It's Andersen, Hansen, Nielsen, Olsen, etc., apart from 2 of them. And in the middle, the smallest guy in the middle, his name is Hyvarinen. And Hyvarinen must be Finnish. It's absolutely true. And the guy next to him is Sjölin, which is Swedish. But apart from those 2, all the others has Norwegian Andersen, Hansen, and Olsen names. Here we are a little later on in history, probably around 1920 or 1910. Well, let's shoot for 1910. And you see the steam schooners have grown quite a bit. And, but still, it's a lot of lumber on the deck. And of course, it's coming into port with a lumber cargo from up north. This one has a star in the funnel, and I bet you this is a McCormack ship. And they say about McCormack, that was a Scotchman, he only hired Norwegian sailors because they were the best sailors in the world. So, and Scotland, of course, isn't very far from Norway. It's just across the 300 nautical miles of sea. So, apart from that, I should mention that quite a few of the shipping company that had lumber schooners, they were Olsen and Mahoney, which was Norwegian Irish. It was Hansen, and it was different Scandinavian names for the ship owner. So not only were the captain Scandinavian and usually Norwegian, but also the crew and even the ship owners. They could be of Norwegian stock. But of course, all of them wanted to be Americans, and it was American flag ship, and they really struggled to become American. And for sailors, you know, that came out of Scandinavia, first of all, when they worked their way on a windjammer to San Francisco, they had a free ride. And when they got there, they could either jump on a new ship and sail to Indonesia or whatever, anywhere in the world, or they could jump ship. but all of them needed to learn English. And in those days, 100 years ago, the best way to learn English was to join these guys on the coastal fleet. And little by little, they picked up, and so the Scandinavian was also a place where you actually could learn English. And when you learned enough English, you could do much better maybe ashore. And remember now that none of those people made letters home to their beloved ones because they worked day and night. And they were young, male, all of them, no female. Female were ashore, and they were American. So after a while, these boys wanted a girl, and they went ashore and found a girl. And I have a couple of very good stories that I didn't put in the book, but I share it with you here now. And that is, maybe I shouldn't. The father of Marilyn Monroe was a Norwegian sailor. And Marilyn has second cousins over in Norway. I'm sure they can prove it by genealogy. Okay, let's switch to a much tougher thing, and that is Abraham Lincoln of the Sea and the Pacific Sailors Union. It's called Sailors Union of the Pacific. One of the first sailors' union started by Scandinavians and a few British and Englishmen that wanted better conditions on the sea, you know. It was back in the 1890s. To sail the high seas on a windjammer was a tough job. All the sailors belonged to the captain. They were sort of the captain's property. And the captain would sometimes, you know, if they didn't like the guy, they would spank him or put him in chain or do whatever they wanted to do. And so they were basically slaves. And this guy called Andrew Furuset, or Anders Furuset in Norwegian, he came out of Norway. He sailed for 18 years on the high seas, in British ships, in Norwegian ships, and even in American ships. And he saw a lot of things that he didn't like. And that was how crew on the ship were treated by bucko mates and rude captains, you know, that really wanted to hurt people. So Andrew Furuset, joined he helped start the Sailors Union of the Pacific, and it became a sort of an organization that became worldwide, and it was a sailors' organization for the world, and he actually got to be a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. for the sailors. And it's written several books about Furuset, and they're very interesting. He was a bachelor his whole life, but he was raised, and he was very well educated himself, and he was left alone on the ship because he was so big. So the captain wouldn't dare take on him. He was big and strong and did a good job. So here we are. I like this picture. Long before U.S. Coast Guard came around, it was another Coast Guard, and those were the Scandinavian Navy. Up and down the coast, 300 ships going up and down the coast all the time. There will always be one if you came in distress. And of course, this Windship, four-mast schooner, is being helped away from being wrecked on the rocks right here by the little propeller, the little steamer with the propeller. And you can see he's working very, very hard because of the smoke. You know, he's really shoveling coals into the furnace to get enough steam to help this guy. And it's many stories about how these lumber schooners helped out. They were easy to ask these captains. And here's one of them. The OM is the old man, and it's a typical steam schooner captain. And they looked like that, some of them, and they were quite some guys. I put in the book stories about some of the captains that when they tried to hijack the safe on board, you know, it didn't work. Because I'm meeting one of those guys, you know, they don't take no for an answer, and they don't take a gun either, you know, they just, well, here's a ship that's almost new one that we're going north and empty with little cargo but quite a few passengers, and it ran into bad weather, and with a full steam, you know, trying to avoid the cliffs and so on, it was just blown on shore. So, and of course the steam engine in those ships weren't very, very strong, so it could happen that they were blown ashore. And this one, they managed to get a line ashore, and they managed to get all the passengers ashore, including an infant, a newborn baby, actually, that one of the sturdy Norwegian sailors took in a trash can on his back. And the baby up in the trash can, and he used the precious boy to get ashore. So everyone was saved, but of course the ship was lost. Here's another one of the old steam schooners. The name of this one is Washington, and you can see the people here. They are definitely Scandinavian. They look very Scandinavian. Big, sturdy guys, you know, that could handle and swing this lumber when it came on board. It's a guy there on the corner up there. Is either the mate or the captain. It could be the captain, the guy with the cap in the middle on top. And two boys there are probably deckhands and the cabin boys for the passengers that this ship would carry. They got to be quite big in the end, you know. They became around 1,000 tons and could carry 1 million board feet of lumber. And this is the very last one. Pictures are taken in the 1930s when it finally quit sailing lumbers from up north, and it's called the Wapama. It was built in 1915 in Oregon, and actually started to sail as a passenger vessel between San Francisco and Los Angeles in the 1930s, when the big, huge steamers that used to go there, the Howard and Yale, beautiful, big, fast-running steamers, they couldn't make ends meet, so they were withdrawn from the service. And then this one took over the service, and for people, you know, especially people that didn't want to drive up and down, they would take the car on board the Wapama, and they would rent a cabin and have a nice night or two trip up the coast to San Francisco. And here is an example of the inside of that ship, the Wapama. It's beautiful, and it looks like a really passenger ship. And remember, this is a lumber schooner, a hybrid ship. Of course, the West Coast tried to do what they did on the East Coast. This is the Lusitania, and It's a four-stacker, and it was running between New York and England for many years. And it was a whole fleet of them. And they carried, of course, millions of immigrants together with mail. That was their mail purpose, of course. It was a mail ship, and that means that the government paid for part of the coal. And you can see this one is firing. 4 of the tunnels are really billowing coal smoke. Going back to the Wapama, she was the jewel of the ship collection of Carl Kortum in San Francisco for many years. And she was moored or tied up at the Hyde Street Park, where the Hyde Street ends, Aquatic Park, I think it's called. And of course, being made of lumber, as all the others, she didn't last in the water forever. You know, when I came and I took this picture in the early 1990s, and she was sitting on a barge over in Sausalito, and she didn't look too good. You know, the rot fungus has sort of started chewing on the hull, and so on. But she was still a thing that could be saved, and we were quite a few persons that really went into this, trying to save her. And I put it in the book. It didn't end very well, because it needed to go inside the building. I said, you can't save a wooden ship out in the open. It will eventually deteriorate as everything else. And so the Park Service finally decided to get rid of the Wapama. That was in 1913. The ship was built in 2013, excuse me. The ship was built in 1915, so it got to be 98 years old. And that was because it was made of wood. When the first steam schooners came in San Francisco, the Norske Veritas and the Norwegians there, they said, well, this is a strange invention. It has a schooner rig and sails up front, and a steam engine in the back, and the middle part is a barge made for lumber with very high gunnels, so you could load, as you saw in the pictures, most of the lumber on deck, because lumber is a very light cargo, and also it can take rain and salt spray and so on. It doesn't matter. Lumber is lumber. It will survive. So this ship, the Verdalen, was made not of wood as in America. They converted the drawings from San Francisco and made the ship from steel and iron. And the Verdalen was made from steel and iron, and it served on the Trondheimsfjord of Norway for 56 years. And after that, it served for other 30 years as a coastal freighter, and finally was going to be sunk to make a breakwater for treasure or pleasure craft, where I found it way up in northern Norway, and since it was built in 1891, I said, this is a ship we should save. So I started to save that ship, actually before I discovered the ships of the Pacific coast, and discovered the history that this was a copy of the ships they had on the Pacific coast. So I took care of it. I hauled it ashore and asked the government for money. They didn't give me any, but I took all the interior, woodwork and everything worth saving, and took it off the ship and saved it inside a container. I said, first I'll restore the ship, then I'll put all the rest back in the ship. This is the lowest part, you know, where it was sitting on a slipway at an abandoned ship in Trondheim in Norway, and you can see it's completely painted over by graffiti and was a home for homeless people, etc., etc. For many years, but finally I got a few kroner from private enterprises, and we could start riveting the ship where it needed to be riveted. And here is the old riveter. He's more than 70 years old, and he came out of retirement to show riveting once again. And when I started saving ships in Norway, I reintroduced riveting as the way to do it. And here you can see on the inside, you see the guy, he's holding a huge, heavy iron bar against the head, so when he is knocking on the outside, it doesn't hop back. And if you look to the right, up along you can see all the new rivets that are finished. And even all the way in the back, you can see holes where rivets need to be put in. I gave the ship to a group that made an organization in Verdalen that were going to restore the ship. They didn't succeed at all, so when I handed it over to them, the ship was, you know, I sailed it to Verdalen and gave it to them. It was okay, but it needed, of course, a lot of repairs. After 8 years, they had folded a couple of years before. Here I am on board, and they have really messed up the ship. But the fine thing, the woodwork around the sofas and so on, they hadn't touched that because it was nothing to ruin. So I started out, and this is redevelopment of the aft launch of the ship. And only the upholstery, of course, is new, but all the wood you see around on the top and the bottom, and even the tables, they are from 1891. And that's quite a sensation. In 2015, I've gotten so far with the ship, I got the engine in and everything working, and I'm going to put the rigging on and finish off everything, the rigging and the mast and everything. And in 2017, it was moved from where it sat over to the pier. The ship is right in the right-hand corner of the picture. And you can see it from way above in one of the cranes. I went up there to take a full picture of the ship before it was launched. And after launching, it was great fun. I think it was a celebration over in Trondheim where this old ship, iron-built, of iron and steel actually, from 1891 was ready to set sail again. And you can see the yard is up, but the sail are not set. But everything else is there, and she's tucking along with not a steam engine this time, because the steam engine was thrown out in 1948. And she got the diesel, and she got another diesel, and I think I have diesel number 4 or 5 in the ship. I'll put the steam engine back if I can afford it, because I have all the drawings. 3 years before Verdalen was built, this tower was built. And it's not a steel tower. It is an iron tower. And that's why it's around even today. The Eiffel Tower in Paris was for many, many, many years to come the tallest structure in the world. I think it was beaten in the 1930s with the Chrysler Building and Empire State Building and those tall buildings. But before that, this was the tallest. And it was built only 3 years before the Vardalen. So, and the Vardalen and the Eiffel Tower are a good example of what they could make back then. Of course, the Eiffel Tower you can't move, but this one you can move. And if someone volunteered to give this ship a free ride, a piggyback on a freighter that goes around the world with cruising yachts and so on, they could take this one along as well, and I'll show you a real lumber schooner, Pacific lumber schooner, that are sailing and steaming as it has done for 131 years today. And I'll sign off lecturing on the book right now, but mention, since Norway was quite a maritime nation and was very good at sailing and so on, all the history of the Norwegian merchant marine are written in Norwegian, which is, for the English today, they don't understand it. This is a picture of the fastest windjammer ever. It's the Lansing. And the Lansing was built as an iron steam passenger ship, the Pereira, and sailed for many, many years in the passenger trade from Le Havre, France, to New York, and later on around the world. It was re-rigged with 4 masts, and when it became Norwegian around 1900, the captain knew he had a very fast ship, so he wanted to test her out, and he could prove several occasions that this ship could do 20 knots by sail alone. And that's something. That's much faster than when she was a steamship. I'll finish right now.
Well, thank you
Okay.
all. I do have a little present for you right here. I'm going to bring it out to you right now. Thank you all for joining us. And remember, come in and see the Mermaids exhibit through March, but we are closed the 22nd to 25th. And then April 14th, we open up All Things Wales. Have a great evening, everyone.